Ma'am, this seat is not meant for someone like you. Please move to economy. The sweet yet razor-sharp voice of flight attendant Rachel Carter cut through the quiet of the first-class cabin. Two security officers silently advanced toward seat 1A, where a black woman was opening her laptop. The cabin lights reflected off the thin frame of her glasses, illuminating the sharp features of Dr. Elena Brooks, 42 years old. Her Armani-tailored blazer fit perfectly. A Patek Philippe watch shimmered on her wrist, and in her hand lay a first-class ticket clearly printed with the words, "Platinum Boarding Pass." No one in the cabin realized they had just made the greatest mistake of their lives. Eleanor looked up, her eyes calm but shadowed by a familiar sting. "There must be some mistake," she said, her voice low and steady, the tone of someone long accustomed to commanding a boardroom. Rachel smiled, a stiff, performative smile. "The system flagged an irregularity with your transaction. We'll need to verify further." From seat 2A, a salt-and-pepper-haired businessman lowered his Wall Street Journal, lips curling into a sneer. "Some people simply don't belong here." The cabin buzzed with murmurs. Curious eyes darted her way. Elena Brooks, the woman who had built a billion-dollar logistics empire, was suddenly reduced to a suspect in the very seat she had paid $2,400 for. Her morning had been meticulously planned. 5:47, a private car from the Ritz, Carlton. 6:15, reviewing the quarterly report. 8:30, a non-stop flight to Denver. Another ordinary day in the life of a CEO. But in this moment, all of it was dismissed with a single glance of doubt. She felt her heart beat slow, each thud heavy. 15 years in business had taught her to recognize the coded language of discrimination, irregularities, fraudulent, verification. These words were not about her ticket. They were about her. "Apologies, but we have to follow procedure," Rachel continued, deliberately loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. The woman in seat 1C pretended to read a magazine, but leaned in to listen. From economy, a passenger peeked through the curtain, phone camera discreetly recording every second. Elena kept her polite smile, but inside, a fire burned. She remembered her mother's words. "When they doubt you, don't shout. Let the truth silence them." Rachel signaled to Sophie, the gate agent. Sophie stepped forward, eyes cold, already decided. "Ma'am, this ticket shows signs of fraud. Please gather your things and move to economy." The businessman in 2A rustled his paper, shook his head and muttered, "This is why I always fly private. Fewer headaches." The cabin thickened with an invisible wall. Eyes darted, unspoken questions hanging in the air. Does this woman really have the money to sit here? Elena closed her laptop. On the screen, the Brooks Logistics logo glowed above the title. Board Resolution. Acquisition Deal 340. The evidence of her power sat in plain sight, but no one cared to notice. She slowly pulled out her phone. Her contacts were a constellation of power. The CEO of American Airlines, the COO of Delta, the Vice President of United Airlines. She hovered over one name, David Park, VP Operations, United. Rachel immediately cut in, voice sharp as glass. "You can make that call from economy." She extended a hand as if to snatch the phone away. Elena drew it back, her eyes flashing steel. I make a habit of conducting business from the seat I paid for, legitimately. Online, the live stream audience swelled. Comments poured in. She clearly has a real ticket. Why are they harassing her? This is blatant discrimination. But Elena did not look at her phone. She stayed in the moment when the world judged her worth by appearance alone. A frozen silence blanketed the cabin. Rachel and Sophie closed in, pressing harder. The businessman in 2A sighed impatiently. The woman in 1C snapped a photo. Everyone assumed Elena Brooks would be dragged from her seat. What they did not know was that this woman was not just a passenger. She was a major shareholder in the very airline trying to expel her. Elena leaned back slightly, a thin smile curling her lips. In her eyes, patience gave way to something sharper, a storm gathering strength. Amid humiliation, Elena did not scream. She did not argue. She quietly prepared to play the move that would force the entire crew to back down. A faint buzzing sound came from the economy cabin behind. A young passenger, phone hidden behind the curtain, whispered, "I'm live streaming this. This is unbelievable." His screen quickly filled with hundreds of viewers, then thousands. Comments flooded in. This is clearly discrimination. Why does she have to prove anything when she already has a first-class ticket? Leave her alone. But in seat 1A, Elena Brooks betrayed no hint of unease. She simply adjusted the collar of her Armani blazer and closed her laptop. Flight attendant Rachel leaned close to whisper in Sophie's ear, but she pitched her voice just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. This ticket is probably fake. That kind of passenger usually is. A murmur rippled through the cabin. The businessman in 2A scoffed, flipping his newspaper as though watching cheap theater. The woman in 1C swallowed hard, her face a mix of irritation and curiosity. Other passengers bent over their work, pretending to ignore, but their eyes flicked toward Elena. In that moment, the first-class cabin became a silent courtroom, every glance a verdict. Elena rested her hand on her knee, her voice calm but cutting through the noise. I purchased this ticket 6 hours ago with the company card. The transaction was approved. Rachel pressed her lips together, but before she could respond, Sophie cut in. Ma'am, we are the supervisors here. If you do not cooperate, we will have to move you to economy. A heavy silence pressed on the cabin. Elena heard the beat of her own heart, not from fear, but from a simmering anger. Memories surged, negotiations where she was dismissed, boardrooms where her skin color was judged before her contracts. 15 years in those shadows had forged her into a strategist of ice. She opened her phone. Her contacts list was a constellation of power. Sarah Johnson, Delta Board member. Michael Grant, CEO, American Airlines. David Park, Vice President of Operations, United Airlines. Her finger hovered, stopping at David Park. Rachel snapped sharply, almost shouting, "Ma'am, you are not permitted to make that call here. If you want to, do it in economy." Her hand reached out, ready to snatch the phone. Elena leaned back, pulling the device close, her voice low but edged like a blade. I conduct my business from the seat I paid for, legitimately. The economy cabin stirred behind. The live streamer whispered, "She's so calm, but that flight attendant is losing control." The viewer count leapt. 847, 1,000, 1,200. A new hashtag, #FirstClassGate, had just appeared on Twitter. A passenger couldn't hold back, shouting from the rear, "They're discriminating against her, plain as day." Gasps echoed through the cabin. Rachel and Sophie glanced at each other, suddenly aware the situation was slipping from their hands. And then a figure of authority appeared. Captain Mark Stevens, with 20 years of experience, stepped out of the cockpit. His uniform, with 4 gold stripes gleaming on the shoulders, cast a weight across the cabin. "What's going on here?" His voice was deep, steady, carrying the authority of a man accustomed to final decisions. Rachel rushed forward, pointing at Elena. "Captain, this passenger is uncooperative. Her ticket has irregularities. We need to move her to economy." Elena sat tall, eyes fixed on Stevens, her voice even. "Captain, I purchased this ticket with the company card. It was approved. My ticket is valid. I am simply sitting in the seat I paid for." Stevens glanced briefly at Elena's phone screen. Everything appeared legitimate, but the pressure from the crew, combined with the rising noise from passengers, made him hesitate. "Ma'am, I understand your frustration, but we need to resolve this quickly. Other passengers are waiting." Elena looked at her watch. The golden glint of the Patek Philippe flashed. She smiled faintly. "Exactly, Captain. I too am waiting for a board meeting worth hundreds of millions. Any delay today will carry consequences greater than you imagine." The cabin erupted in murmurs. Several passengers began discreetly searching the name Elena Brooks. The live stream surged, comments pouring in. "Don't let them throw her out. I just looked her up. Brooks Logistics is $1 billion company. Oh my God, they picked the wrong person." Captain Stevens frowned, realizing this was no longer a dispute over a seat. It was becoming a global peak crisis unfolding right before him. Elena gently closed her laptop, the Brooks Logistics logo, and the heading Board Resolution Acquisition Deal 340 NUM, glowing before the screen went dark. Her gaze was steady, unflinching. She was ready for the next move. One call, just one. And the fate of everyone on this flight would be turned upside down. The air in first class was thick, ready to burst. Every eye locked on seat 1A, where Elena Brooks sat upright, her hand resting lightly on a glowing phone screen. Captain Mark Stevens loomed above, his voice stern. "Ma'am, if you do not cooperate, we will have no choice but to call security to remove you." Beside him, flight attendants Rachel and Sophie stood like hawks, faces tight with the anticipation of victory. The businessman in 2A smirked, muttering to his seatmate, "At this rate, this flight will never take off." But Elena did not flinch. She raised her phone, her finger gliding across the screen. "One phone call," she said, her voice not loud, but resonating through the cabin. "I'll put it on speaker, so everyone can hear the truth." A flicker of hesitation crossed Captain Stevens' face. He knew in just a few minutes the live stream could destroy the airline's reputation. He gave a reluctant nod. 5 minutes. This is your final chance." The cabin fell into silence. Everyone held their breath. Elena scrolled through her contacts. Her finger stopped on the name. David Park, VP Operations, United Airlines. One tap. The call rang. Beep, beep. Each tone struck like a hammer in Rachel and Sophie's chests. The businessman in 2A glanced over, his confidence faltering for the first time. The livestream counter ticked upward. 1,200, 1,500, 1,800 viewers. And then a man's voice filled the cabin through speakerphone, deep and unmistakable. "Elena, how's the flight to Denver? Are you ready for the big board meeting?" The cabin erupted in shock. The businessman in 2A dropped his newspaper. The woman in 1C gasped, blurting, "Oh my God, I know who she is." Rachel's face drained of color, her hand trembling as she frantically searched Elena Brooks' name on her phone. The results flashed instantly. CEO, Brooks Logistics. Revenue, $2.3 billion, strategic partner of United Airlines. Captain Stevens froze, his expression shifting from authority to unease. "Elena." David Park's voice grew sharper, urgent. "What's going on? Why are you still in Chicago? You should already be in the air." Elena tilted her head, her eyes sweeping coldly across every face that had insulted her. "There's been a small problem, David. Your crew believes my first-class ticket is fake. They are preparing to drag me off this flight." The words landed like a bomb in the cabin. "I repeat, they intend to remove the CEO of Brooks Logistics from the seat I paid for, legitimately." A dead silence followed. Only the sound of heavy breathing filled the air. Then David Park's voice thundered through the speaker. "What? What the hell are they doing?" The cabin roared with murmurs. Passengers immediately raised their phones, recording. The hashtag @FirstClassGate shot up the trending charts. The live stream surged past 2,000 viewers. Captain Stevens blinked rapidly, 20 years of experience offering no guidance for this moment. Rachel stood frozen, her body rigid. Sophie bowed her head, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Elena sat tall, no longer carrying the weight of restraint. She pulled a folder from her bag. On the cover gleamed the United Airlines logo, stamped with a digital signature. "Stock purchase confirmation. Brooks Investment Fund." She lifted the papers high, her voice steady and commanding. "And to make things perfectly clear, as of yesterday, my company owns 12% of United Airlines. I am not just a passenger. I am the third largest shareholder of this airline." First class exploded in gasps. Several passengers sat slack, jawed. The businessman in 2A dropped his head, unable to speak a word. In the suffocating silence that followed, Elena Brooks smiled. Not the smile of arrogance, but of someone who had just delivered the decisive strike. One phone call, one piece of paper, and all the false assumptions shattered. The real battle had only just begun. The entire first-class cabin sank into a suffocating silence. They had just learned an unbelievable truth. The woman they tried to push down to economy was, in fact, a major shareholder of the very airline they served. Captain Mark Stevens swallowed hard, his hand clenched tightly around his notebook. 20 years of crisis management had never left him trembling like this. He knew one wrong word now could ignite his career into flames. Rachel, the lead flight attendant, shook as her eyes clung to the glowing line on her phone screen. Elena Brooks, CEO of Brooks Logistics, billionaire, major shareholder of United Airlines. Sophie stood frozen, her face pale, as if she had just witnessed a disaster unfold before her. Elena drew a long, steady breath. Her voice rang out, clear and sharp, every word striking like a hammer on steel. "Captain, ladies and gentlemen, I was doubted, insulted, and humiliated on a flight belonging to the very company I partly own." She paused, sweeping her gaze across the cabin. Eyes met hers, each passenger feeling the weight behind her words. "I will not turn this into a personal outburst. I don't need anyone on their knees apologizing. What I need is change." The rapid clicking of keys came from a young passenger live streaming. He nodded to himself, whispering into the mic. She isn't shouting. She isn't losing control. She's turning humiliation into a lesson for the whole world. The live stream counter pulsed upward. 2,500, 3,000, 3,400 live viewers. The hashtag most first class gate shot straight into the nation's trending list. Elena opened her laptop, the glow reflecting across her composed face. A slide appeared with the title United Airlines Strategic Partnership Proposal. Her voice rose, steady and commanding, as though she were standing before a boardroom. "Today, I am flying to Denver to present this plan. A deal worth $3 million, projected to grow to $800 million in 5 years. But imagine this. What happens when this video spreads across every platform? When shareholders, investors, and customers see that even the third largest shareholder was treated with contempt." The air seemed to explode. The businessman in seat 2A, who had once smirked with disdain, now lowered his head, his fists clenched tight. Captain Stevens stepped forward, his voice cracking. "Dr. Brooks, I truly didn't know." "You don't need to apologize," Elena cut him off, her eyes gleaming like tempered steel. "But this airline needs a new framework, a system that guarantees no one else will endure what I just did." Rachel shuddered, replaying in her mind the moment she had called Elena a fraudulent passenger. Her eyes welled with tears, but she dared not speak. Sophie's gaze stayed fixed on the floor. Elena's eyes moved from Sophie to the captain. "You think this is about a first-class seat. It is not. This is about an entire system of bias. And I have 3 proposals right here." She raised 3 fingers, her voice steady, cutting through the air. "First, mandatory unconscious bias training every month for all frontline staff. Second, the introduction of a bias alert app, allowing passengers to report incidents of discrimination directly to the executive board, bypassing middle management. Third, tie diversity and inclusion outcomes directly to bonuses and promotions." A wave of murmurs swept through the cabin. Some passengers nodded firmly in agreement. A few even clapped softly. The live stream exploded with comments. "This isn't about tickets anymore. This is reforming the entire airline industry." "She's rewriting history right here, mid-flight." The live viewer count surged. 4,000, 5,200, 5,800. Elena closed her laptop, her tone softening, every word slicing straight into the heart of her audience. "What I am asking for is not privilege for myself. I want to ensure that anyone, no matter what they look like, can sit in the seat they paid for without being doubted simply because of their appearance." First class fell into a deep, echoing silence. No one dared laugh. No one dared cast a condescending glance. All that remained was awe, mixed with a creeping fear. The woman they had underestimated had just transformed humiliation into the beginning of a sweeping reform. Silence. The air in first class felt as if it had been compressed under tons of invisible weight. Captain Mark Stevens stood frozen, his eyes fixed on the woman who had just turned this cabin into a boardroom. Elena Brooks's words still rang in his mind. I don't need an apology. I need change. Rachel, the lead flight attendant, avoided Elena's gaze, tears brimming in her eyes. Sophie stood behind her, clutching the edge of a seat, her palms slick with sweat. They all knew what they were witnessing today was not a passenger resisting. It was a powerful shareholder setting terms at 30,000 feet. The phone in Elena's hand was still on speaker. The voice of David Park, Vice President of United Airlines, reverberated through the cabin, taut as a wire. Dr. Brooks, what do you want us to do to resolve this immediately? Elena closed her laptop and leaned back against her seat. I want the 3 conditions I outlined to be formally committed to. And I want that commitment, here, now. Passengers gasped. Several raised their phones to record, the live stream count jumping. 7,000, 8 through 200, past 9,000 viewers. Captain Stevens swallowed hard, fighting to steady his voice. Dr. Brooks, are you certain this is the right place to discuss corporate reform? Elena tilted her head, her eyes sharp as ice. Captain, it was here that I was doubted, insulted, and threatened with removal from my seat. If I remain silent, how many others will suffer the same? It is here that change must begin. A burst of applause erupted from the back of the economy's cabin. A few passengers shouted out, "She's right! Let her speak!" The live stream scrolled with comments. I've got chills listening to this. History is being written on this flight. David Park's voice returned, more decisive now. Dr. Brooks, you will have my word. I will convene an emergency leadership meeting immediately. But please allow the flight to take off. Elena glanced at her watch. The second hand of her Patek Philippe swept quietly under the cabin lights. A faint smile crossed her lips. We will take off, David. But first, one final matter. The cabin tightened like a drawn bowstring. Elena opened her folder and pulled out a document titled Proxy Voting Authorization, Brooks Investment Fund. She rose to her feet, her voice carrying through the cabin. As of today, as a shareholder holding 12% of United Airlines, I cast my vote here and now to approve the 3 anti-discrimination reforms. This authority is legitimate, and it will be recorded. Phones clicked furiously. The woman in seat 1C gaped, speechless. The businessman in 2A scrambled for his laptop, typing frantically as though to verify every word. Rachel whispered in a trembling voice, My God, she's making decisions for the entire board. Captain Stevens drew in a long breath, then nodded firmly. Dr. Brooks, on behalf of the airline, we accept. I will record this incident and report it to the board. And, his voice caught, I apologize for what happened to you. Elena sat down, a fleeting smile flashing across her face. A personal apology is a beginning. But what I need is systemic change. And today, we have set it in motion. First class erupted in applause. The live stream surged past 10,000 viewers. In that moment, an undeniable truth echoed across the skies. Elena Brooks had transformed humiliation into a reform mandate mid-air. The plane gave a slight shudder as the cabin doors closed. But in first class, no one was thinking about takeoff. Every mind was fixed on the woman in seat 1A. Elena Brooks, the billionaire CEO who had just turned humiliation into a historic agreement. Passengers' phones buzzed non-stop. The live stream had passed 12,000 viewers. Comments poured in like a flood. She just used shareholder power right there on the plane. This is the first time I've ever seen a passenger flip the entire game like this. Just let her run the airline already. From the economy cabin, a young student exclaimed, "She isn't just fighting for herself, she's fighting for all of us." In the cockpit, Captain Mark Stevens gave a tense report over the internal channel. With every word he spoke, he noticed his hand trembling slightly. 20 years of international flights, and Stevens had never faced anything like this. A powerful shareholder issuing directives from inside the passenger cabin. Rachel sat slumped in the jump seat, her face drained of color. Sophie quietly dabbed sweat from her forehead. They both knew their careers were now under a global microscope. Elena was different. She opened her laptop and connected to the in-flight Wi-Fi. Instantly, headlines lit up her screen. Breaking news. First class. Gate, billionaire CEO kicked out of first class seat. CNN. United Airlines incident could shake Wall Street. Forbes. Elena Brooks, from mere personal humiliation to industry-wide reform. Elena's lips curved slightly. She was no stranger to media attention. But this time, it wasn't about a business deal. It was about a moment of prejudice that millions had just witnessed. Captain Stevens leaned toward Rachel, his voice urgent but hushed. "Do you understand? An incident like this could wipe out billions in market value overnight." Rachel choked back a sob. For the first time in her career, she saw her own mistakes magnified under a global lens. Eleanor typed a short message on Twitter. "I am not seeking privilege. I am demanding fairness for every passenger. #first class gate." Within minutes, the tweet was shared tens of thousands of times. The trending icon glowed red. News networks cut into programming for live updates. A commentator on CNN declared, "This is no longer a service issue. This is a brand crisis. United Airlines must change, or the market will force it to." In the cabin, the man in seat 2A, who had once mocked Eleanor, now stared at his lap, typing an email of apology. The woman in seat 1C whispered to her neighbor, "I'm going to tell my granddaughter I was here, on this flight when history was made." The live stream counter leapt. 15,000, 18,000, then past 20,000. The entire world was now watching a woman who had once been told to move to economy. Elena slowly closed her laptop and drew in a deep breath. The fury she had felt at first had transformed into something else. A force, a rising wave of reform beyond anyone's control. Outside, the midday sun blazed across the clouds, but inside every passenger's heart, They knew they were flying through the eye of a storm, a revolution born from a woman once dismissed, now rewriting the history of aviation. The engines hummed softly as the plane began to roll towards the runway. But inside first class, the sound of human hearts was louder than any machine. Elena Brooks sat upright, her gaze calm yet blazing with intensity. In front of her stood Captain Mark Stevens, caught between two worlds. On one side, a rattled crew, on the other, passengers live-streaming to tens of thousands of viewers. "Dr. Brooks," Stevens began, his deep voice straining to hold authority. "I understand your anger, but please consider, this is a commercial flight. We need order." Elena tilted her head slightly. "Order? Captain, order is not silence in the face of injustice. True order is when every passenger is respected equally." The cabin held its breath. Rachel, the lead flight attendant, suddenly spoke, her voice trembling. "Dr. Brooks, I am sorry. I was wrong to doubt you, but I was only following procedure." Elena turned, locking eyes with her. "The procedure was not wrong, but the way you chose to apply it turned a paying passenger into someone humiliated. Do you know what that feels like?" Rachel lowered her head, tears spilling onto her white gloves. Sophie rushed in, her tone urgent, almost pleading. "We didn't mean to discriminate. We just thought." Eleanor cut her off, her voice sharp as steel. "What did you think? That a woman of color in a blazer couldn't sit in seat 1A? That my Amex black card was fake? That power only wears gray suits and white faces?" Sophie's sobs filled the silence. No one else in the cabin dared to make an excuse. Captain Stevens drew a long breath, then met Elena's eyes. "Dr. Brooks, what do you want us to do right now?" In that moment, the entire cabin leaned toward Eleanor. Every phone camera, every gaze, every heartbeat waited for her answer. Eleanor rose to her feet, her voice ringing out like a bronze bell. "I don't want a lengthy report. I don't want another empty apology. I want a commitment, right now, in front of every passenger here." From the phone speaker, David Park's voice rang out again, firm and resolute. "Dr. Brooks, you will have that commitment. I am convening an emergency board meeting. We will sign the document the moment you land." A quiet sob came from economy class. The man in seat 2A, who had once sneered, now stood awkwardly and began to clap. The applause spread from 1A to 1C, and then to the rows of economy behind. Elena lifted the shareholder document high, her voice steady and commanding. "Today, here in the sky, we have witnessed that true power is not money or titles. True power is the courage to stand and demand justice, even when you are most underestimated." The live stream exploded. More than 25,000 people were watching live. Comments poured in. "She just turned the cabin into a court of conscience. I will never forget this flight." First class thundered with relentless applause. On passengers' small screens, the hashtag #FirstClassGate shot straight to #1 worldwide. And Elena Brooks, the woman once told to leave seat 1A, had now turned a flight into the stage for a historic reckoning. 3 hours later. The plane's wheels touched down on the Denver runway, a gentle jolt rippling through the cabin. But in the hearts of every passenger, the echoes of the confrontation still rumbled like thunder. First class was utterly silent. No more smirks of contempt, no more suspicious glances. Every gaze turned toward Elena Brooks, as though she had descended from a mountain, a survivor of the storm, who had turned that storm into a weapon. Captain Mark Stevens opened the cockpit door and stepped out, his voice lowered. "Dr. Brooks, on behalf of the crew, I offer you my sincerest apology. And I promise, from this moment, everything that happened will be documented, reported, and changed." Elena looked at him, her eyes no longer burning with anger, only calm resolve. "Captain Stevens, I respect your sincerity. But you must understand this. Individuals can apologize. The system must change." Stevens bowed his head, heavy with the weight of her words. In his eyes, the pride of 20 years in the skies seemed to crumble. When the cabin door opened, the afternoon light spilled in, scattering across the floor. Passengers filed out, many pausing to whisper, "Thank you. We will tell our children about this. You just changed the way I see the airline industry." The man from seat 2A, the one who had once sneered, stepped forward, his voice unsteady. "Dr. Brooks, I was wrong." Elena nodded slightly. No reproach, no need for more words. She knew her silence now carried more weight than any sentence. At the arrivals gate, dozens of reporters waited. The news of Hatchet on first class gate had spread across the globe. Camera flashes lit up like a storm of rain. A CNN reporter shouted above the chaos, "Dr. Brooks, will you sue United Airlines?" Elena stopped, her eyes locking on the sea of lenses. "I don't need to sue. I need them to change. And today, on this flight, that change has begun." The doors of the Denver boardroom swung open. Inside, the United Airlines board of directors was waiting. Cold white lights gleamed over a long table lined with straight-backed leather chairs. Directors whispered among themselves, their faces tense, caught between anxiety and anticipation. Elena entered, her blazer still sharp, her gaze proud. The entire room rose, not out of courtesy, but because the truth was undeniable. They needed her to save the airline from the media firestorm raging outside. David Park, the vice president, stepped forward, his tone urgent. "Dr. Brooks, we are ready to approve your 3 proposals, but is there anything more you want?" Elena paused, her eyes flashing. "I want more than a promise. I want a commitment in action, right now." She placed a dossier on the table. Bold letters on the cover read, "Anti-Discrimination Protocol, 30, Day Implementation Plan." The board members all bent forward to read. Not a single voice dared to protest. Denver, 5 p.m. In the cold chamber of corporate power, Elena Brooks was no longer the passenger who had been humiliated. She was the one holding the board, turning personal disgrace into leverage for reform, worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And this was only the beginning. The boardroom on the 32nd floor of United Airlines headquarters was bathed in cold white light, its floor to ceiling windows opening to the Denver skyline in the late afternoon. Inside, the atmosphere was thick, like a storm about to break. Elena Brooks entered, each step echoing across the wooden floor. Her Armani blazer was still immaculate after a long flight, but her eyes burned with determination. The entire board rose to their feet, not out of courtesy, but from instinct, confronted by the undeniable truth. They were facing a shareholder powerful enough to shake the airline to its core. Board Chairman Robert Martinez cleared his throat. "Dr. Brooks, we've followed the live stream, and we—" Elena raised her hand, her voice low and firm. "Do not begin with an apology. I've heard enough. I am here today to discuss solutions, because apologies will not save the reputation collapsing outside those doors." The room fell into silence. The only sound was the faint click of cameras from reporters waiting in the hallway. Elena switched on the projector. A slide appeared. Anti-discrimination protocol. 30-day plan. She spoke, every word like a nail driven into wood. Phase 1. Within 60 days, all frontline staff must complete unconscious bias training. Phase 2. Launch the Bias Alert app, allowing customers to report discrimination incidents directly to senior leadership, bypassing middle management. Phase 3. Tie diversity and inclusion metrics directly to KPIs. Any employee involved in discriminatory incidents will see their bonuses and promotions impacted. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the board members. "This is not a suggestion. This is a choice between change or losing an $800 million 5-year contract with Brooks Logistics." An older director, Sarah Wilson, sighed, her voice low. "What is the implementation cost, Doctor?" "Brooks?" Elena snapped her fingers, and her assistant switched the slide. $12.3 million in the first year, $4.7 million annually for maintenance. ROI in 18 months through reduced litigation and higher customer satisfaction. A few directors exchanged glances. The numbers were too clear to dismiss. Martinez leaned forward on the table, asking directly, "So what do you want from us, beyond approval of this plan?" Elena lifted her chin. "I want United to be the pioneer of fairness and inclusion in aviation. Not chasing public opinion, but leading it. I want United to turn today's humiliation into a legacy the entire industry must follow." In the stillness, eyes dropped one by one to the documents before them. 1 minute, 2 minutes, then Martinez tapped his pen against the table, his voice firm. "We vote now." The hands went up, almost unanimously. Not a single objection. Elena closed her eyes briefly. She knew this moment would be etched into the history of aviation, from a humiliation in Seat 1A to a reform worth hundreds of millions. As she left the boardroom, Elena Brooks did not wear the smile of victory. She only exhaled, her eyes distant. For deep down, she understood. This was only the opening chapter. The real battle would be turning promises into action. 2 weeks after the incident, the skies over America felt different. Not because the clouds had changed color, but because the way passengers looked at the airline industry had shifted. And first-class gate was still trending at the top. But instead of outrage, now countless videos of gratitude, testimonies, and personal stories were being shared. An elderly man said that for the first time in 30 years, a flight attendant addressed him correctly by name. A young black student recorded the moment she was invited to sit in a priority seat without suspicion. An Asian passenger wrote, "Thank you, Elena Brooks. Because of you, I no longer feel like an outsider when I fly." At United Airlines headquarters, the Bias Alert app officially launched. Within 10 days, thousands of reports were submitted, many issues resolved immediately before they could escalate. The numbers were no longer just dry statistics. They had become living proof of real change. Eleanor stood by the window of her Brooks logistics office, watching planes take off and land in the distance. Inside her, the anger from that day had transformed into steady resolve. No one deserves to be humiliated simply because they don't look like someone's idea of a proper passenger. Rachel, the flight attendant who once blocked Eleanor, now stood at the first United training session. Her voice trembled, but her eyes were steady. "I was wrong, but the second chance Dr. Brooks gave me has taught me this. Change doesn't begin with regulations. It begins in the human heart." The hall fell silent, then erupted in applause. Elena sat quietly at the back, nodding gently. She believed that sometimes a fall is the seed of growth. News spread quickly. Other airlines began calling Brooks Logistics, seeking advice on implementing training and oversight systems. American Airlines invited Elena to speak at a global summit. Delta proposed a partnership to scale the Bias Alert app. Soon her influence stretched beyond the skies. Hotels, restaurants, and tech companies all reached out, asking Brooks Logistics to consult on diversity and inclusion. 1 year later, at the Department of Transportation's awards ceremony, United Airlines received the award for excellence in diversity and inclusion. But the person who walked up to the podium was not United's CEO, nor its chairman, but Elena Brooks herself. Flashbulbs lit up. The entire hall rose to its feet. Elena spoke, her voice warm yet resounding. "Dignity isn't negotiable, and true power is not in shouting, but in standing firm, quietly, until the system itself has to change." For a moment, the audience was silent. Then thunderous applause shook the room. In that moment, Elena was no longer just the passenger who had been doubted in seat 1A. She had become a symbol of a generation, proving that a single proud refusal could force an entire industry to bow to change. The first-class boarding pass from that day now hangs framed in her Brooks Logistics office, next to a photo of her on the awards stage. To visitors, Elena only smiles and says, "This is not a plane ticket. This is proof that a woman once underestimated could rewrite history." In the world of business and service, discrimination sometimes hides behind polite smiles or the cold lines of procedure. But the story of Elena Brooks has proven a truth. Dignity is never negotiable, and true strength does not lie in financial power, but in the resolve to stand firm when being underestimated. From a seat that was denied, Eleanor turned a humiliating moment into a lever for reform, transformed a chaotic live stream into a manifesto for an entire industry. More importantly, she showed that change does not begin in grand boardrooms, but in the small, unjust moments that demand courage to confront. If you believe respect should always be the default, leave a comment with the words, "Respect first." Do not forget to hit like to spread this message, and subscribe so you will not miss the next stories, where ordinary people turn injustice into legacy. Because sometimes all it takes is one timed no to change the world.